The most dangerous sound in the kingdom was not a roar. It was a child crying. That night, the sky above Iron Vale turned red. Not sunset red, not fire red, war red. People ran into the streets. Guards shouted from the walls. Bells rang again and again. Mothers pulled their children inside. Soldiers lifted their shields and stared upward in fear. A dragon had crossed the border. And not just any dragon, a royal dragon. High above the city, something moved inside the clouds. Huge shadows passed over rooftops. The air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. Even the horses in the stables screamed and kicked against their doors. Inside a small blacksmith shop near the outer wall, Ethan Hale wiped sweat from his forehead. He was not a soldier. He was not important. He was only 22 years old and worked long days shaping iron for men who went to war. He heard the bells. He heard the shouting. He stepped outside. The sky looked like it was bleeding. Then something fell. It tore through the clouds like a broken star. Fast, spinning, burning. Ethan barely had time to step back before it crashed into the alley behind his shop. The ground shook hard enough to knock him down. Dust filled the air. Wood broke. Stone cracked. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a soft sound. Not a roar, not a growl, a cry. Ethan slowly stood up. His heart was beating fast. His hands were shaking. He grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a heavy iron hammer, and walked toward the alley. Smoke drifted between the buildings. Broken bricks were scattered everywhere. A deep crater had formed in the stone road. And inside that crater, something moved. Ethan froze. It was a dragon, but smaller than he expected. Much smaller, about the size of a large horse. Its silver scales were cracked and stained with blood. One wing was twisted at a painful angle. Golden chains hung loosely from its body, broken, like it had escaped from something. And around its neck, a royal mark. Ethan had seen drawings in old books. He knew that symbol, the dragon prince. His throat went dry. This was not just a dragon. This was the heir to the dragon kingdom. And he had fallen into the human capital. The dragon tried to stand, but collapsed. His breathing was weak. His eyes, bright gold, but filled with fear, slowly looked up at Ethan. For a second, they just stared at each other. Human, dragon, enemies for generations. Ethan knew the law. Every child in Iron Vale knew the law. Touch royal dragon blood, and you invite war. He should walk away. He should call the guards. He should protect his kingdom. But then the dragon prince did something no one expected. He reached out with a shaking claw and grabbed Ethan's shirt, not to attack, not to burn, to hold. Then he cried again, a small, broken sound, like a lost child. Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. This was not a monster. This was a boy. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Soldiers were moving through the streets. Horns were blowing from the castle tower. The Dragon Kingdom would notice their prince was missing. They would search. They would assume the worst. If the humans were seen standing over the wounded prince, war would begin before sunrise. Ethan looked at the broken chains around the prince's body. These were not human chains. They were dragon steel. Someone from the Dragon Kingdom had chained him. Someone powerful. The prince tried to speak, but only blood came from his mouth. Ethan made a choice in that moment. A choice that would change everything. He dropped the hammer. He carefully stepped closer. The prince flinched at first, ready for pain. But Ethan slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he whispered softly. The dragon's claws tightened weakly around his shirt. Ethan moved carefully, sliding one arm under the prince's neck and the other under his body. The prince was heavier than he looked. Warm, shaking, afraid. Ethan carried him inside the shop. The bells outside were louder now. Guards were shouting orders. From far above the clouds, a deep roar echoed across the sky. Not from a prince, from something much bigger. The Dragon King had noticed. Inside the blacksmith shop, Ethan laid the prince on a work table. The wood cracked slightly under the weight. He looked at the injuries. Arrow wounds, burr marks, bruises. Someone had attacked him in the sky. The prince's golden eyes opened slightly. "Don't send me back," he whispered weakly. Ethan felt cold. Send him back? Why would a dragon prince fear his own kingdom? Before Ethan could answer, the sky exploded with light. A massive shadow covered the entire city. A voice, deep and powerful, shook every wall and every heart. "Return our prince, or your kingdom burns." Screams filled the streets. The Dragon King had arrived. Ethan looked down at the wounded prince, gripping his sleeve. Outside, thousands of soldiers prepared for war. Above, dragon warships circled like hungry beasts. One human, one crying dragon child, and a decision that could destroy two kingdoms. The night was far from over, and the world would never be the same again. The sky did not just darken. It closed. Dragon warships covered the stars like moving mountains. Their wings were wider than castle towers. Their shadows swallowed the city of Ironvale whole. People dropped to their knees. Some prayed, some cried, some ran, but there was nowhere to hide. Inside the small blacksmith shop, Ethan stood frozen. The dragon prince was shaking on the wooden table. His breathing was weak. His silver scales looked dull under the firelight. Another roar shook the city. This one was closer. Dust fell from the ceiling beams. Ethan stepped to the door and looked outside, and his heart stopped. A massive dragon descended in the center of the capital, larger than any creature Ethan had ever imagined. Black scales like iron armor, eyes glowing like molten gold. The Dragon King. When he landed, the ground cracked. When he breathed, the air burned. And when he spoke, even stones seemed afraid. "Return, my son, or your kingdom dies tonight." His voice was not loud. It was calm. That made it worse. The human king stood on the palace balcony, pale and shaking. Soldiers lined the walls, arrows aimed at the sky, even though everyone knew arrows were useless. No one moved. No one spoke. Then a group of royal knights rushed down Ethan Street. Someone had seen the falling fire. Someone had followed the crash. The knights reached the broken alley and saw the crater and the blood. They did not need more proof. "The dragon is here," one shouted. They kicked open Ethan's shop door. The sight inside stunned them. Ethan was standing beside the prince, not holding a weapon, not attacking. He was pressing cloth against a bleeding wound, trying to stop it. The knights raised their swords. "Step away from it," their captain shouted. Ethan did not move. "If you touch him, he dies," Ethan said firmly. The captain hesitated. The prince slowly opened his golden eyes. He saw the swords. He saw the fear. And then he saw Ethan. His claws weakly reached out and grabbed Ethan's arm again. Not in anger, in fear. "Stay," the prince whispered. The room fell silent. The captain lowered his sword slightly. Outside, a massive shadow passed over the roof. The Dragon King was turning his gaze toward this street. He could feel his son. Dragons always could. The prince tried to sit up, but cried out in pain. Ethan held him steady. "You're safe," Ethan whispered. But the prince shook his head. "No, I'm not." The knights exchanged worried looks. "What does he mean?" one asked. Before anyone could answer, the sky exploded with fire, but not from the Dragon King. From above the fleet, one dragon warship suddenly burst into flames. Dragons screamed in shock. Ethan rushed outside. The entire city stared upward. Two dragon fleets were fighting each other. Fire against fire. Roars against roars. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The Dragon King's head snapped upward in fury. "Varric," he growled. The name spread through the air like poison. General Varric, the strongest commander in the Dragon Kingdom. A dragon known for hating humans more than anyone. Another warship fired, but not at the city. At the Dragon King. Gasps filled the streets. This was not a war between humans and dragons. This was a dragon civil war. Inside the shop, the prince tried to stand again. "He wants war," the prince whispered. "If I die here, he becomes king." Ethan felt cold. Someone inside the Dragon Kingdom had tried to kill their own prince. And now they wanted the humans blamed. If the prince died in human hands, the Dragon King would destroy everything, and General Varric would take power in the chaos. Ethan understood now. This was never an accident. The broken chains, the arrows, the fall from the sky. The prince had escaped and landed in the only place no dragon would expect. A human's arms. Outside, the Dragon King roared so loud that windows shattered. "Show yourself, traitor!" From the clouds, a massive red dragon emerged. larger than the prince's father. His scales were dark crimson. His eyes burned with hatred. "General Varric, you are weak," Varric shouted. "You talk of peace with humans while they grow stronger. The prince would rule soft. I will not allow it." Fire clashed in the sky. The city trembled. Humans stood between two dragon armies. And in a small blacksmith shop, the future king of dragons was bleeding on a wooden table. The prince looked at Ethan. "They will kill you to reach me." Ethan met his gaze. "Then they'll have to go through me." The prince's golden eyes widened slightly. No human had ever spoken to dragon royalty like that. Not with courage. Not without fear. The ground shook again. Varric's forces were breaking away from the main fleet. Some dragons were choosing sides. War was no longer coming. It had already begun, and the Dragon King's voice echoed once more across the burning sky. "If my son dies tonight, I will erase this world." Ethan looked down at the wounded prince, gripping his sleeve. One human, one choice, and two kingdoms seconds away from destruction. The real war was not above the clouds. It was inside this small room, and the prince had chosen, but the world had not yet realized what that choice meant. The sky was no longer red. It was burning. Dragon fire clashed above Iron Vale like falling stars. The air shook with every explosion. Buildings cracked. Windows shattered. People screamed and hid inside cellars. But in the middle of that chaos, one small blacksmith shop stood silent. Inside, Ethan wrapped fresh cloth around the Dragon Prince's wound. His hands were steady now, not because he was calm, but because fear had passed. There was no more time for fear. Outside, the Dragon King roared again, this time not in warning. In rage, General Varric's Red Fleet had split from the main dragon force. Half of the sky now belonged to him. The other half stood loyal to the king. And below them stood a human city, trapped between monsters. The prince tried to sit up again. "You must let me go," he said weakly. Ethan shook his head. "You can't even stand. If they find me here, they burn everything." Ethan looked at him carefully. "Is that what your father would do?" The prince hesitated. That silence said more than words. Suddenly, the shop door exploded inward. Royal human guards rushed in, swords raised. Behind them stood the human king himself, pale and furious. "So it's true," the king said coldly. "A human shelters the dragon prince." Ethan stood in front of the prince without thinking. "He's wounded. He's the reason we're about to die," the king shouted. Outside, another blast shook the ground. A dragon body fell from the sky and crashed into the palace tower. The human soldiers trembled. The king pointed at Ethan. "Hand him over." "Now." The prince slowly raised his head. His golden eyes locked onto the human king. For a second, the entire room felt smaller. Then something impossible happened. The dragon prince slid off the table. He stood barely. He walked past Ethan and stood beside him. Not behind, beside. Gasps filled the room. The prince spoke, his voice still weak but clear. "I was not attacked by humans." The king frowned. "It was Varric," the prince continued. "He chained me. He shot me from the sky. He wanted me to fall here." Silence swallowed the room. "Why?" the human king asked slowly. "So you would kill me," the prince answered. "Or so my father would believe you did." Ethan felt the weight of those words. This was a trap. A perfect trap. If humans attacked the prince, dragons destroy the kingdom. If dragons attack the city, humans fight back. Or either way. Varric wins either way. Outside, a massive shadow blocked the light. The Dragon King had landed near the palace. His claws crushed stone like paper. His voice thundered across the capital. "Bring me my son." The human king looked at Ethan, then at the prince, then at the burning sky. "If I step outside with him," the king whispered, "and you are lying, we all die." The prince looked straight into the human king's eyes. "I swear on royal blood." A dangerous oath. Dragons did not swear lightly. Before the human king could decide, the roof above them shattered. Wood and stone exploded inward. A massive red dragon crashed into the street outside the shop. General Varric. His crimson scales glowed like lava. His eyes burned with pure hatred. He did not roar. He smiled. "There you are, little prince," Varric said smoothly. "Playing with humans." His gaze moved to Ethan. "And you," he said quietly, "will be the spark that ends them." Varric opened his mouth. Fire gathered. The human soldiers panicked. The king stepped back. Ethan did not move. He stepped forward and stood in front of the prince. Varric laughed. A human shield? But before the fire could leave Varric's mouth, silver light filled the street. The dragon prince lifted his shaking hand and released a blast of pure silver flame. Not large, not wild, precise. It struck Varric's jaw and forced his mouth closed. Shock flashed across the general's face. The prince staggered but remained standing. "You will not use them," the prince said firmly. The Dragon King landed behind Varric with earth-shaking force. The ground split between them. Father and traitor, king and general. "You dare raise fire against my son?" the Dragon King growled. Varric turned slowly. "He is weak," Varric said coldly. "He stand with humans." The Dragon King's eyes moved toward Ethan, the human who stood protectively beside his wounded son. Something changed in the king's expression. Not anger. Not yet. Understanding. The prince stepped closer to Ethan again. Clear. Visible. Choosing his side in front of both armies. "If you kill him," the prince said to his father, "you prove Varric right." The entire sky went quiet. Even the fighting above slowed. Dragons watched. Humans watched. One choice. One decision. Or something else. The Dragon King lowered his head slightly. "Speak," he commanded his son. The prince pointed at Varric. "He tried to kill me, because I refused war." Murmurs spread through the dragon fleet. Varric's wings flared wide. "He would make us weak." "No," the prince answered. "He would make us just." Silence. The kind that comes before history changes. Varric roared in fury and launched himself into the air. The Dragon King followed. Two massive bodies clashed above the burning capital. And below them, Ethan stood beside a dragon prince who had just defied his own kind. The prince looked up at Ethan. "I chose you," he said quietly. Ethan swallowed. "Then let's survive this." Above them, fire and thunder filled the sky. But for the first time that night, hope had entered the battlefield, and the world would never return to what it was before. The sky split open. Fire crashed against fire as the Dragon King and General Varric tore through the clouds. Their massive bodies shook the heavens. Every clash sounded like thunder breaking the world apart. Below them, Iron Vale was on its knees. Buildings burned. Soldiers stood frozen. And in the middle of the ruined street stood Ethan beside the Dragon Prince. The prince was breathing harder now. His silver scales flickered weakly. Using his power had cost him more than he showed. "Stay behind me," Ethan said quietly. The prince almost smiled. "You are not stronger than a dragon." "Maybe not," Ethan replied. "But I don't run." Above them, Varric slammed into the Dragon King, sending both crashing through the clouds. A wave of heat rolled across the city. Then something changed. Varric pulled away midair. He did not attack the king again. He turned downward, toward the city, toward the prince, toward Ethan. The Dragon King roared in warning, but Varric was already diving like a falling star. His wings folded. His mouth opened. Fire gathered brighter than before. This was not normal flame. This was war fire. It would not just burn buildings. It would erase them. People screamed. The human king shouted for shields. Archers fired arrows that melted before reaching the sky. Ethan saw it clearly. Varric was not trying to kill the prince. He was trying to force the Dragon King to choose. Save the city or save his son. The prince understood too. "If he burns the city," the prince whispered, "Father will have no choice but to destroy humans forever." Ethan looked at him. "How we stop him?" The prince closed his eyes. "I don't know if I can." Varric was seconds away. Fire now lit the entire sky red. And then, the prince stepped forward. Not behind Ethan. Not hiding. Forward. He spread his damaged wings. Ethan grabbed his arm. "You can't." "I must," the prince said calmly. He lifted his head high and shouted toward the sky. "Varric." The general's dive slowed slightly. Just enough. The prince's voice echoed across the battlefield. "You wanted war? Then face me." Gasps filled the streets. Even the Dragon King froze in midair. The prince turned to Ethan. "If I fall, Do not let them say I feared. Before Ethan could answer, the prince launched himself into the sky. His wings struggled. Blood trailed behind him. But he flew. Not high, not strong, but enough. Varric laughed darkly. A child challenges me? He redirected his dive toward the prince instead of the city. The Dragon King followed in fury. 3 dragons now raced toward each other in the burning sky. Ethan felt helpless. He looked around desperately. Then he saw something. On the broken street, near the crater where the prince had fallen earlier, one of the dragon's steel chains. It had strange markings carved into it. Ethan remembered the prince's wounds. Those chains had weakened him. Maybe they were not just chains. Maybe they were weapons. Above, Varric collided with the prince. Silver flame met red fire. The prince screamed in pain. The Dragon King was almost there, but not in time. Varric grabbed the prince by the throat midair. You were never fit to rule, Varric snarled. The city held its breath. The Dragon King roared with a sound that shook mountains. Ethan ran. He grabbed the broken dragon chain with both hands. It was heavy, cold. Strange energy pulsed through it. Without thinking, without a plan, he ran into the open street and shouted at the sky. Hey! Varric glanced down. Just for a second. Just long enough. Ethan swung the chain upward with all his strength. It barely reached, but the chain reacted. The carved symbols flared bright blue. The chain shot upward like lightning and wrapped around Varric's wing. The general roared in shock. The magic chain tightened, dragging him off balance. The Dragon King reached them in that exact moment. His claws slammed into Varric's chest. The sky exploded with impact. Varric fell, not toward the palace, not toward the prince, but away from the city. He crashed into the outer fields beyond Ironvale, shaking the earth. Silence followed. Heavy, unreal. The Dragon King caught his son midair and gently lowered to the ground. The prince was barely conscious. His silver scales were dim. Ethan ran forward. The Dragon King's massive golden eyes locked onto him. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the king looked down at the broken chain in Ethan's hands. You used dragon magic, the king said slowly. Ethan swallowed. He was going to kill your son. The Dragon King lowered his head toward the prince. The prince opened his eyes slightly. He stood with me, the prince whispered. The Dragon King looked at Ethan again, not as an enemy, not as prey, but as something new. The dragon fleet above had stopped fighting. They were watching, waiting. Their king now had a choice. Declare humans enemies forever, or admit that a human had just saved the future of dragons. The Dragon King rose to his full height. His voice rolled across the silent battlefield. General Varric is declared traitor. Shock spread through the dragon ranks. He attacked royal blood. More silence. And this human, the entire city tensed, stood where many dragons would have fled. Ethan did not kneel. He did not bow. He simply stood there, tired, dirty, holding a broken chain. The Dragon King turned toward the sky. The war ends now. The red dragon fleet hesitated. Then one by one, they lowered their wings. The sky slowly cleared. The fire faded. But something much bigger had changed. The prince looked at Ethan weakly. You pulled a dragon from the sky. Ethan let out a slow breath. Don't make it a habit. For the first time since the night began, the Dragon King almost smiled. But the war was not truly over, because Varric was still alive. And revenge burns hotter than fire. And somewhere beyond the fields, the traitor dragon opened his eyes. The battlefield was quiet. Too quiet. Smoke drifted across the broken streets of Ironvale. The dragon fleet hovered in the sky, waiting for command. Human soldiers stood frozen, unsure if they were alive by luck or by mercy. The Dragon King stood tall in the center of the ruined city, his wounded son resting carefully between his claws. Ethan stood a few steps away, still holding the broken dragon chain. For a moment, it felt like the war had ended. But then, a deep rumble came from beyond the city walls. The ground trembled again, not from the Dragon King, not from the fleet, from the fields. Ethan felt it first. The prince opened his eyes slowly. He's not finished, the prince whispered. Far beyond the gates, the earth cracked open, and from the dust rose General Varric. But he was no longer calm. His red scales were shattered in places. One wing dragged uselessly behind him. Blood ran down his side, yet his eyes burned brighter than ever. You think I would fall so easily? Varric's voice thundered across the land. The dragon fleet shifted uneasily. Some of them had once followed him, and some still feared him. The Dragon King stepped forward, placing himself between Varric and the city. This ends now, the king growled. Varric laughed. No, it ends when dragons rule without weakness. His eyes locked onto Ethan. You infected him, Varric said coldly. You made him doubt our power. Ethan did not step back. I didn't make him doubt, Ethan answered. I showed him another choice. Varric roared and launched forward. But this time, he did not aim for the prince. He did not aim for the king. He aimed for Ethan. The Dragon King reacted instantly, but Varric had already learned from before. He twisted midair and used his damaged wing like a shield, blocking the king's path. Varric landed directly in front of Ethan. Massive, burning, terrifying. Without you, Varric said softly, this weakness dies. He opened his mouth. Fire gathered again. Ethan felt the heat on his face. He knew he could not outrun it. He knew he could not fight it, but he did not move. Behind him, the prince struggled to stand again. No, the prince shouted. The Dragon King roared and tried to reach them. But Varric was faster this time. Fire exploded forward, and then something unexpected happened. The Silver Dragon Prince stepped between the flames and Ethan. The fire struck him directly, but instead of burning, the silver scales absorbed it. The prince screamed in pain, but he did not fall. His body began to glow brighter and brighter. Not red, not gold, silver, pure and blinding. The sky responded. The dragon fleet felt it. A royal awakening. The prince had never used his full power before, because he had never chosen to. Now he had. Not for war, not for pride, for protection. Varric stepped back in shock. You dare? The prince lifted his head. His voice was no longer weak. You say strength is fear, the prince said calmly. You are wrong. The silver light burst outward in a wave, not destroying buildings, not burning soldiers. It struck only one target. Varric. The red dragon roared as the silver energy wrapped around him like chains of light. The same magic he once used to bind the prince. Now binding him. The Dragon King landed beside his son, not to fight, to witness. Varric struggled, but the more he resisted, the tighter the light held him. You were my greatest general, the king said quietly, and my greatest mistake. With one final command, the silver chains tightened. Varric's roar echoed once across the fields. Then silence. The light faded. The red dragon lay still. The traitor was defeated, not by fire, not by war, but by the prince he called weak. The battlefield stayed quiet for a long moment. Then one dragon in the sky lowered his head. Then another. Then the entire fleet bowed, not to the Dragon King, to the prince. The Dragon King looked at his son with something new in his eyes. Not doubt, not fear, pride. The prince slowly turned to Ethan. You stood when others would run, he said softly. Ethan looked around at the destroyed streets. I just didn't want anyone else to die. The Dragon King stepped toward Ethan. Humans tensed again, but the king did something no one expected. He lowered his massive head. A Dragon King bowing to a human. You saved my son, he said. You saved my kingdom from itself. The human king slowly approached as well. For the first time, the two rulers stood face to face. Not as enemies, but as survivors. No war, the human king asked carefully. The Dragon King looked at his son, then at Ethan. No war, he answered. The prince stepped forward. Strength is not in burning cities, he said clearly. It is in choosing not to. Years later, history would remember this night. Not as the night dragons attacked, not as the night war began, but as the night a dragon prince cried in a human's arms and chose peace over power. And the kingdoms would tell their children one truth. Sometimes the bravest act in war is refusing to fight, and sometimes the future king is the one who learns how to protect.